I didn't plan the party to prove anything. I planned it because no one else would. My parents were coming up on their 40th anniversary, and my sister Emily floated the idea of a small celebration, maybe just a lunch she'd texted in the group chat. My brother Michael replied with a thumbs up emoji. Then nothing. Weeks passed. No venue, no planning, no effort. So I stepped in. I spent 2 months researching charter options out of San Diego. I found a yacht with polished wood decks and a private dining salon that could seat 30. I hired a live orchestra, just strings and keys, soft enough to let people talk. I sourced 3 cases of curated wine from a sommelier who specialized in coastal pairings and the flowers. I asked a boutique florist to replicate my mother's wedding bouquet in white tulips and ranunculus. She cried when I showed her the inspiration photo. I thought that meant something. Altogether, it cost me $18,500. I didn't tell my parents the exact amount, just said it was taken care of. They didn't ask, and maybe that should have been my first sign. But at the time, I didn't care. I took time off from my freelance clients. I coordinated schedules, held Zoom calls with vendors, drafted a seating chart that subtly kept my father from cornering my cousin with unsolicited investment advice. Every detail was thoughtful, precise, not because I wanted recognition, but because I believed this would finally be a moment where we stood side by side, not in roles. Not me as the helper, the organizer, the quiet one who fixes things, just me, their daughter Jane, present. The final invoice came through a week before the event. I paid it without flinching, and then, almost immediately after my Aunt Susan texted the tone casual, almost flippant, "By the way, it said we're keeping the guest list tight. You're not included." I stared at the screen, thinking it was a mistake, some kind of scheduling miscommunication. Then my mom followed up with a second message. "It's not personal, Jane. Hope you understand." I didn't answer. I didn't call. Instead, I just sat there holding my phone, trying to remember the last time they looked at me like family instead of staff. I kept staring at the message like it might rewrite itself if I waited long enough. "We're keeping the guest list tight. You're not included. No apology, no explanation. Just that." At first, I thought maybe she'd sent it to the wrong person. I waited for a follow-up, some kind of correction. Oops, wrong thread, or even a laughing emoji, but nothing came. Just silence. Then my mother's name popped up on my screen. I opened the message. "It's not personal, Jane. Hope you understand." And somehow that hit harder. That line, "It's not personal," I'd heard it before. When they forgot to call on my birthday 2 years in a row, when they took a family trip to Yosemite and told me afterward they assumed I'd be too busy to come. When my sister's boyfriend of 2 months got an invitation to Christmas dinner and I didn't, it was always the same message. "Hope you understand. Hope you understand we forgot. Hope you understand it wasn't meant to hurt. Hope you understand you don't matter enough to include, but just enough to clean up after." I didn't text back. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't plead for space on the guest list of a party I planned. Instead, I scrolled through my calendar, stared at all the appointments I had scheduled for their big day catering confirmations, wine delivery, orchestra arrival time, yacht access window. I saw my own name listed on every email, every booking, every receipt. But somehow, I wasn't on the guest list. I put my phone down and stood in the kitchen, unsure what to do next. My hands felt like they didn't belong to me. There was nothing to fix, no miscommunication to clear up. They had made their decision. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I could make one too. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. Not my friends, not my siblings especially, not them. I opened my laptop and pulled up the contract for the yacht. The cancellation window was still open, though barely. I sent an email to the coordinator citing a change in event terms and requested the deposit be returned. Within minutes, I received a confirmation. Next was the orchestra. The lead violinist had been kind in every call. He'd even offered to shorten the set when I asked about budget limits. I messaged him directly, told him the event had been reshaped, and asked to pause the remaining balance. He replied with grace, said he understood. The wine shipment was trickier. The sommelier was already packing crates ready to deliver, but when I flagged the order and explained that the party had changed drastically, she agreed to hold. No refund, but no delivery either. I could live with that. The flowers were already in motion. Custom work non-refundable. I didn't even try to stop it. Let them arrive. Let someone else figure out where to put 24 arrangements of white tulips and pale blue ranunculus. That part wasn't mine anymore. I sat on the dock that night, the one just a few blocks from my apartment, watching the water stir beneath the dim lights of the marina. If I leaned forward, I could still see the harbor where the yacht would have departed. I imagined the empty decks, the missing music, the clinking of plastic wine cups instead of stemmed glass. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not revenge, just distance, a clean detachment from something I had once tried so hard to be part of. They made it clear I wasn't invited. I just made sure they noticed I was gone. The morning of the party, my phone started ringing. I was still in bed, eyes barely open, the sun just beginning to cut through the blinds. I didn't pick up. The first few calls came in quick succession, my dad's name Richard lighting up the screen each time. No voicemail, just silence after silence. By the fourth call, I turned the phone over so I wouldn't see it vibrate. By the seventh, I put it in the drawer beside my bed and shut it completely. I already knew what this was. The music hadn't shown up. The wine hadn't arrived. The yacht never pulled into the dock. The party was unraveling. And now they remembered me. I spent the next few hours like I had nowhere to be. I brewed coffee, slowly walked down the street to the corner bakery, and bought myself a croissant, something I never did when I was still busy fixing other people's emergencies. I sat on a bench outside watching people with somewhere to be rushed past. I didn't think about the party. I didn't think about the guests or the moment someone realized there was no orchestra tuning up or wine being poured. I let myself enjoy the fact that I had no role today, no clipboard, no calls to return. At noon, I turned my phone back on. 11 missed calls, 10 from my dad, 1 from my aunt. I let it ring once more, then I picked up. He didn't yell. He didn't apologize. He just asked Jane what happened, like it was some unexplained event. Like I'd gone rogue without warning. Like the exclusion, the dismissal, the text "you're not included" had never happened. I paused for a second. Then I answered the only way I could. "It's not personal." And I hung up. I stood in the kitchen phone, still in my hand, waiting for the rush of adrenaline that usually followed confrontation. But it didn't come. There was no wait, no regret, just stillness. That line, they had used it like a knife for years. A phrase to cut through responsibility, through acknowledgement, through consequences. And now I handed it back to them. It wasn't anger, it was a boundary. And this time, they were the ones on the outside of it. 3 days after the party, I opened my phone for the first time. There were no missed calls, no texts, no voicemails, just quiet like I'd slipped through a crack and no one noticed. I scrolled out of habit and landed on my sister's page. She had reposted someone else's photos, probably our cousin Laura's, who treated Instagram like it was a seasonal scrapbook. The caption read a beautiful celebration for 2 beautiful people. But the photos told a different story. There was no tent, just a patchy backyard with folding tables and a few sun-bleached plastic chairs dragged in from the garage. One picture showed a cooler on the grass, half-open bottles of soda floating in melting ice. Another captured a table centerpiece grocery store, carnations still in their plastic sleeves, shoved into a mason jar like someone gave up halfway through. In one frame, my dad stood near the fence, arms crossed, looking off toward nothing. He wore a dress shirt that didn't fit quite right. In another, my mom posed with 2 of her sisters. Her smile was stiff. Her eyes were puffy. I could see the line of uneven makeup under one of them. I stared at the photos longer than I meant to, not out of regret, but curiosity. It was like watching a version of reality I'd quietly been edited out of. They had a party, they celebrated, they smiled for the camera, and not one of them had the decency to reach out, not to ask why I canceled, not to ask if I was okay. They just moved on and filled in the gaps without me. And somehow that didn't hurt. It clarified because when I looked at those photos, I didn't see something I missed. I saw something I refused to carry anymore. The photos didn't make me sad. They made me take inventory of every task I'd taken on over the years without hesitation. Every time I drove 2 hours to fix the garage door or reprogram their thermostat. Every time I filed their taxes because you're so good with numbers. Every time I paid off a bill they casually mentioned over dinner and never brought up again. 2 years ago, I covered a $2,800 roof repair when my dad sighed about a leak and then stared at me for a beat too long. I wired the money that night. No one acknowledged it except my brother, who sent a thumbs up emoji when the roof held through the first storm. I kept their HVAC system under my name because I'd signed up for the plan during an emergency winter breakdown. I paid their annual service fee automatically, $315 a year. I'd almost forgotten it existed until I saw the charge again last month. And it wasn't just money, it was time. It was my Saturday afternoons. It was my quiet mornings spent researching the cheapest contractors, the fastest printers, the best sales on whatever it was they'd forgotten to plan for. It was emotional labor disguised as helpfulness, masked by politeness, never once mistaken for love. So I stopped. I logged into every account with my name on it. Removed saved payment methods, canceled subscriptions, deleted reminders. I made calls, closed accounts, transferred responsibilities. It took a full afternoon, and when I finished, I didn't feel guilt. I felt lighter. That evening, I pulled out a half-finished side table I had abandoned months ago. I sanded the edges, glued the joints, and ran my fingers along the frame. There was peace in that building, something that didn't need me back. Something that stood because I chose to give it structure, not because it demanded it. And for the first time in years, I realized how quiet my life could be when it wasn't being spent on someone else's unfinished mess. The message came in just after noon. Laura, hey, your sister's been saying you ghosted the party, that something's going on, that they're worried about your mental health. I stared at the screen, not surprised, but still stunned. Ghosted. I planned the entire thing, paid for it, orchestrated every vendor in detail, and now I was a no-show with a supposed breakdown. They weren't just erasing me, they were rewriting me. I didn't even hesitate. I opened my receipts folder. Screenshot after screenshot, paid invoice for the yacht, the wine order confirmation, the paused catering contract, then the text from my aunt. You're not included. Then my mom's follow-up, it's not personal, Jane. I sent them all to Laura in a clean, quiet thread. She didn't respond right away. A few minutes passed, then what the hell, I had no idea. They made it sound like you were unstable. Unstable. That word stayed in my hands longer than the phone itself. After everything I had done, the moment I stopped performing, they didn't ask why. They just filled the silence with something that made them feel better. I replied simply, I didn't ghost the party. I wasn't invited to it. She didn't argue. I wasn't trying to stir things up. I wasn't looking for sides or sympathy. I just needed one person to see it clearly. I needed the truth to live somewhere outside of me. Laura said she believed me, said it made sense now why the wine didn't show why the tent never arrived. They didn't say any of that she wrote. Of course they didn't. I put down the phone and felt the difference instantly. Not relief, not validation, just clarity. The kind that doesn't beg to be understood. It just exists. The first message came 2 days after Laura's from my brother. Hey, not sure if you heard, but the internet's been down all morning. Dad's losing it. Know anything about routers? I didn't respond. The next day, my mom. Hi, Jane. The microwave's acting up again. Not urgent, but if you have a minute. Still nothing. Then my dad sent a photo, the garage door motor, half disassembled wires exposed. No words, just the image like I'd see it and come running. I didn't. I stared at it for a few seconds, then closed the message and got back to my grocery list. It kept happening every couple of days. A new text, a new problem. The gutters were backed up. The printer wasn't connecting. They couldn't remember how to access their tax files. Not one of them said sorry. Not one acknowledged the party. The messages weren't about mending anything. They were about maintenance. They weren't missing me. They were missing the unpaid labor, and I wasn't offering it anymore. I spent my time in smaller, quieter ways. I built a narrow shelf for the hallway. I went to a weekend flea market just because I could. I started going to bed earlier without the anxiety that someone might call with a crisis disguised as casual conversation. They used to treat my silence like a phase, something temporary, something to wait out. But this wasn't silence. This was a boundary, a firm, unfamiliar edge they couldn't reach past. And when they realized they couldn't cross it, they didn't apologize. They scrambled. Laura texted me on a Thursday afternoon, said she was in town and had something she wanted to say in person. No pressure. We met at a quiet coffee shop a few blocks from my place. She looked nervous, which wasn't like her, and she didn't waste time. I think your mom's actually going to therapy, she said. For real, like weekly sessions. She told my mom it started after the party. After you went silent, I didn't say anything. I just waited. She broke down when she tried to plan Thanksgiving, Laura added. No one volunteered to help. My dad told her we're not doing that again. That's when she admitted everything, not just about the party, about how she's treated you for years. Laura paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She slid it across the table. It's from your dad, she said. He asked me to give it to you. I unfolded it slowly. One sentence written in shaky all-caps handwriting I recognized instantly. I'm trying to learn how to be a dad. No greeting, no signature, just that. And yet somehow it landed deeper than all their forced smiles and polite excuses over the years. There was no pretending in that sentence, just an awkward, raw attempt at honesty. I slipped the note into my bag and nodded. Laura didn't press. She just said, whatever you decide, I get it, and left it at that. That night I sat at my desk with a blank card. I didn't want to undo the distance I'd built, but I also didn't want to ignore what felt like their first real step. So I wrote, I'm not ready to return, but I'm open to something honest. I didn't sign it with love, just my name, Jane. Then I sealed the envelope, placed it by the door, and told myself I'd mail it in the morning. Months passed and the quiet held. No chaos, no guilt-laced requests, just space. I spent my time in ways that didn't involve fixing things. I hiked canyon trails I'd always said I was too busy for. I cooked meals slowly without glancing at the clock. I built a bench for my front porch out of reclaimed cedar and sat on it with a mug of coffee each morning, watching the light change. I slept better than I had in years. Then one day a message came from my mom. It wasn't long, just that they wanted to meet if I was willing. No demands, no manipulation. I sat with it for a few days before answering. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral ground. They were already seated when I arrived. My dad stood when I walked in, an old habit he hadn't dropped even after everything. My mom looked tired, but more present than I remembered. They didn't start with excuses. They didn't list their regrets like a script. They just looked at me, and then my mother said, "We're sorry, Jane, for the way we treated you, for making you feel like help instead of family." My dad nodded. We should have known better. The words weren't polished, but they were real, and for once they weren't trying to speed past the discomfort. I let the silence hang before I answered. "Thank you," I said. "I heard you, but I'm not coming back. Not yet." My mom blinked but didn't argue. My dad looked down at his hands. I stood, and neither of them reached for mine. I left without anger, without a need to explain. Some doors don't slam, they just close quietly, cleanly, and you realize the lock was always on your side. I learned that love isn't a transaction, but I'd been treating it like one, pouring time, money, and effort into my family, hoping it would earn me a place among them. Their exclusion at the party I planned wasn't just a slight. It was a mirror showing me how I'd let myself become their fixer, not their daughter. Canceling the event wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming my worth. By stepping back, I saw clearly boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. Their silence after their attempts to pull me back into old roles taught me that change starts with me, not them. I stopped carrying their burdens and started building my own peace, sanding wood hiking trails, living for myself. Their eventual apologies didn't erase the past, but they showed me people can shift even slightly when you hold your ground. The deepest lesson was this: my value doesn't depend on their recognition. I choose who I give my time to, and I choose me first. That quiet clarity, that unshakable sense of self is what I carry forward stronger than any resentment or regret.
The crystal chandelier in the hotel ballroom cast elegant shadows across Sarah's engagement party, illuminating faces I hadn't seen in months. My sister had outdone herself with the venue, the Meridian Grand Hotel's premier event space, with its soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. 200 guests mingled beneath strings of fairy lights, champagne glasses clinking as Sarah basked in the attention she'd always craved. I stood near the back, wearing a simple navy dress from Target, watching my sister work the room in her designer gown. At 29, Sarah had built her life around appearances. Her fiancé Marcus came from old money, and she'd spent the last 2 years transforming herself into the perfect society wife. Tonight was her moment to shine, and she wasn't about to let anyone steal her thunder. Especially not me. "Emma." Sarah's voice cut through the cocktail chatter as she approached with Marcus and his parents. "Come meet the Worthingtons properly." I'd been introduced briefly during the receiving line, but Sarah clearly wanted to establish the family hierarchy for her future in-laws. Marcus's mother, Patricia Worthington, wore pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars, while his father, Judge Worthington, had the bearing of a man accustomed to deference. "This is my younger sister," Sarah began, her tone already apologetic. "Emma works in an office downtown." "How lovely," Patricia smiled politely. "What type of work do you do, dear?" Before I could respond, Sarah jumped in. "Meet my sister, the secretary," she announced loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Several heads turned in our direction. "Still doing filing?" she added with that familiar smirk I'd endured since childhood. The group waited for my response. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the subtle condescension in their polite smiles. Sarah had always been the golden child. Homecoming queen, sorority president, marketing executive at a prestigious firm. I was the family afterthought, the one who'd dropped out of college, the one who'd never quite measured up to Sarah's achievements. "Office work, yes," I nodded quietly, keeping my voice steady. Judge Worthington nodded approvingly. "Honest work. We need people willing to handle the day-to-day operations." "Exactly," Sarah beamed. "Emma's very practical. Aren't you, Em?" The word practical hung in the air like a dismissal. It was Sarah's code for ordinary, unremarkable, settled for less. She'd used it my entire life and it still stung. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah, maybe we should." "Oh, it's fine," Sarah waved him off. "Emma knows her place in the family. Don't you, Em?" Around us, the party continued. Sarah's college friends clustered near the bar, their conversations punctuated by bursts of laughter. Her co-workers from the marketing firm had claimed a corner table, already deep into office gossip. The Worthington family contingent held court near the appetizer station, their voices carrying that particular cadence of inherited confidence. I'd grown up at events like this, always introduced as Sarah's little sister, always relegated to the children's table long past childhood, always expected to be grateful for inclusion. My parents had set the pattern early. Sarah was destined for greatness, while I was encouraged to be realistic about my limitations. Emma was always the quiet one. Mom had joined our circle, wine glass in hand. Sarah got all the personality in the family. "And the ambition," Dad added, approaching with a plate of canapés. "Though Emma's doing fine for herself. Steady job, modest apartment. Nothing wrong with keeping things simple." Their words felt like paper cuts. Small, precise, accumulating over decades. Sarah glowed under their praise while I stood there, reduced to a cautionary tale about settling for less. "What exactly do you do at the office?" Patricia asked, her interest seemingly genuine. "Administrative support," I replied simply. "Filing mostly," Sarah clarified with a laugh. "Some data entry. Basic office tasks. Nothing too complicated." The Worthingtons nodded politely, their assessment of me clearly complete. I was the sister who'd provide a nice contrast to Sarah's success. Proof of good genes channeled properly versus wasted potential. "Well," Judge Worthington cleared his throat, "every organization needs reliable support staff." The phrase, support staff, settled over me like a blanket of finality. It wasn't cruel exactly, just dismissive in that perfectly polite way that made disagreement seem petty. Marcus pulled out his phone to check the time, his expensive watch catching the light. "The photographer will want some family shots soon," he told Sarah. "Perfect timing." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Emma, you'll be in a few photos, won't you? For the album." Her tone suggested she was doing me a favor, including the family secretary in the official record of her engagement to high society. I understood my role. Background figure in Sarah's success story, proof of how far she'd come. "Of course," I smiled. "Wonderful." Patricia clapped her hands together. "Marcus, show them those lovely photos from your Harvard reunion. The Worthington family has quite the legacy there." As Marcus scrolled through his phone, showing off pictures of ivy-covered buildings and accomplished classmates, I felt the familiar sensation of being measured against Sarah's achievements and found wanting. It wasn't malicious. My family genuinely believed they were being helpful by managing expectations, keeping me grounded, preventing disappointment. The photographer materialized with his equipment, directing the family into various configurations around the ballroom. I stood where positioned, smiled when instructed, and tried to look appropriately grateful for inclusion in Sarah's perfect evening. Now just the immediate family, the photographer directed, gesturing for me to step aside. I moved toward the edge of the group, understanding my place in the hierarchy. Through the camera lens, Sarah would be the radiant center, surrounded by parents and fiancé, while I'd appear in a few wider shots as additional context. Emma's always been the practical one, I heard Mom explaining to Mrs. Worthington as they waited for the next pose. Never had Sarah's drive for big careers. How wise, Patricia replied diplomatically. Not everyone can handle the pressure of executive positions. Their conversation drifted over me as I watched Marcus check his phone again. The device's screen lit up his face in the dim lighting, and I saw his expression change. His eyebrows drew together, then shot up in surprise. "What's wrong, darling?" Sarah noticed his expression. Marcus stared at his phone, then looked up at me with confusion. This is going to sound strange, but... The photographer was still adjusting his equipment, giving Marcus time to process whatever he'd seen. Around us, party guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the shift in Marcus's demeanor. Her fiancé's phone lit up. "Wait, is this you on Time's cover?" he asked, his voice carrying across the small circle. The question hung in the air like a record scratch. Sarah's smile froze. Mom's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Dad stopped mid-chew on his canopy. The entire party turned to stare. As Marcus held up his phone, the Time magazine app opened to this week's cover story. The silence stretched like pulled taffy, everyone processing what they were seeing but not quite believing it. In the background, the party continued. Laughter and clinking glasses and the photographer adjusting his lights. But our small circle had become an island of stunned quiet. Sarah was the first to find her voice. That's not possible. But Marcus was already scrolling through the article, his expression growing more incredulous with each paragraph. Judge Worthington moved closer to read over his son's shoulder, while Patricia fumbled for her own phone. "The biotechnology breakthrough of the decade," Marcus read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Emma Richardson, founder and CEO of Richardson Labs, has revolutionized cancer treatment with her groundbreaking immunotherapy research." Dad's canopy fell from his fingers. "It says here you have 3 degrees from MIT, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as the reality sank in. "PhD in molecular biology, founded your company 5 years ago, currently valued at $2.8 billion. Mom's wine glass joined Dad's canopy on the floor. "The article mentions you've been working nights and weekends in your lab while maintaining a cover job as administrative support at a downtown office building." Marcus looked up from the phone. "To throw off corporate espionage attempts." Sarah's perfect makeup couldn't hide the color draining from her face. But you're just a secretary," I finished quietly. "Yes, that's what I let everyone believe." The photographer had noticed the commotion and approached our group, camera at ready. Around us, other party guests were pulling out their phones, apparently receiving the same news alerts that had reached Marcus. "Oh my God," Patricia whispered, her phone screen showing the same Time magazine cover. You're Dr. Richardson. The Dr. Richardson." Judge Worthington cleared his throat, his entire demeanor shifting as he processed this information. We had no idea." "Nobody did," I replied simply. That was the point. Sarah's carefully constructed evening was unraveling in real time. Her engagement party, designed to showcase her ascent into high society, had suddenly become the backdrop for a revelation that repositioned everyone in the room. "But why?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Why would you let us think?" "Because it was easier," I said. "Corporate espionage is real in biotech. The fewer people who knew about my research, the safer it was. Even family." Around us, the whispers were starting. Other guests had clearly received similar news alerts, and phones were being passed around tables as people tried to process the disconnect between the woman they'd been introduced to as the secretary and the scientist gracing the cover of Time magazine. "Emma," Mom approached tentatively, her voice small. "Honey, we didn't know." "I know," I said gently. "You weren't supposed to." Dad was staring at his phone, reading what appeared to be a financial article. "It says here your company just went public. The IPO raised $3.2 billion. "Last week," I confirmed. Last week. Sarah's voice pitched higher. You've been a billionaire for a week and didn't tell us? I've been a billionaire on paper for 3 years, I corrected. The public offering just made it official. The photographer had given up pretending not to listen and was openly documenting what was clearly becoming a more interesting story than a simple engagement party. Other guests were migrating toward our group, drawn by the growing commotion. Marcus was scrolling through more articles on his phone. There's a whole profile in Forbes from 6 months ago. The mystery CEO who's revolutionizing cancer treatment. It has your picture. We never read Forbes, Mom said weakly. Apparently we should have, Dad muttered. Sarah stood frozen in the center of it all, her perfect party derailed by the revelation that her dismissed little sister was actually the most successful person in the room. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman she'd introduced as administrative support was being featured on magazine covers while Sarah's own career achievements suddenly seemed modest by comparison. The article mentions your lab has developed treatments that could save millions of lives, Patricia read from her phone, her voice filled with a respect that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. We're still in clinical trials, I said modestly. But the early results are extraordinary, Judge Worthington added, clearly reading from the same article. 93% remission rates in stage 4 patients. The room had grown quieter as more guests became aware of what was happening. Conversations had shifted from wedding planning and office gossip to hushed discussions about the Time magazine cover that was apparently trending on social media. How long? Sarah asked quietly. How long have you been working on this? 8 years, I replied. Since I left college. You didn't drop out, Dad said slowly, understanding dawning. You transferred. To MIT's accelerated PhD program, I confirmed. Full scholarship. I graduated at 23. Mom sank into a nearby chair. 8 years. You've been working on cancer research for 8 years and we thought. You thought I'd given up, I finished. I know. The weight of 8 years of family dinners settled over the group. 8 years of being introduced as the family disappointment, 8 years of gentle suggestions to be more ambitious, 8 years of comparisons to Sarah's conventional success. Marcus was still reading, his fascination growing with each article. It says you've published over 40 papers in peer-reviewed journals. You hold 17 patents. The FDA fast-tracked your treatment because the results were so promising. 41 papers, I corrected automatically. And 19 patents as of last month. Sarah's designer gown suddenly felt less impressive in a room where her sister had just been revealed as one of the world's leading cancer researchers. The crystal chandelier that had seemed so elegant an hour ago now illuminated a gathering where the woman labeled as just a secretary was actually the guest with the most extraordinary achievements. The White House called this morning, I added quietly. The president wants to discuss expanding federal funding for cancer research. Apparently, our results have caught some attention. Patricia nearly dropped her phone. The president? It's scheduled for Thursday, I said simply. Judge Worthington, who had spent his career in positions of authority, suddenly looked uncertain. Dr. Richardson, we owe you an apology. No apology needed, I said. You responded to the information you had. But Sarah wasn't ready to let it go. 8 years, Emma. 8 years of letting us believe you were a failure. I suggested gently. Her silence was answer enough. Around us the party had transformed. Guests who had barely acknowledged me during the receiving line were now positioning themselves for introductions. The Worthington family friends who had politely dismissed me an hour earlier were suddenly very interested in conversation. Dr. Richardson, one of Judge Worthington's colleagues, approached hesitantly. I don't suppose you're accepting new patients for your clinical trials? The question hung in the air, highlighting the dramatic shift in perception. The woman they'd written off as ordinary was now being approached for life-saving medical intervention. We have a waiting list, I said diplomatically. Of course, he nodded, looking embarrassed by his presumption. Sarah's perfect evening had become something else entirely. Her engagement party was now overshadowed by the revelation that her family's supposed underachiever was actually an internationally recognized scientist whose work would likely save millions of lives. The photographer had been discreetly documenting the entire exchange, recognizing that he was witnessing something more newsworthy than a standard engagement party. The moment when a family discovered their daughter's true identity was exactly the kind of human interest story that magazines paid well for. I should probably leave, I said quietly to Sarah. This is your night. No, she said quickly, then caught herself. I don't know what I mean. The honest confusion in her voice was more vulnerable than any of her usual confidence. For the first time in our lives, Sarah didn't know how to position herself in relation to me. The Time article mentions you're planning to expand internationally, Marcus said, still processing the information on his phone. Opening research facilities in 12 countries. 15 actually, I corrected. We finalized agreements with 3 more governments yesterday. Patricia laughed nervously. And here we were worried about your career prospects. The understatement of the century hanging in the air between crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. In a room full of people who had spent the evening making assumptions about a woman whose actual life made their accomplishments seem quaint by comparison. Sarah's engagement party would be remembered, but not for the reasons she'd intended. Instead of celebrating her ascent into high society, it had become the night her family discovered that their idea of success needed serious recalibration. Emma, Sarah said finally, her voice small. I'm sorry. I know, I replied gently. But you don't need to be. The sincerity in that moment cut through years of family dynamics, revealing the love that had always existed beneath the surface of sibling rivalry and parental expectations. Will you stay? She asked. For the rest of the party? I looked around the room, at my parents still processing 8 years of misunderstanding, at the Worthington family recalibrating their assessment of Sarah's relatives, at the photographer documenting a story that would probably end up in magazines itself. Of course, I said. But maybe we should take that family photo now. I have a feeling tonight's going to be talked about for a long time. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. Yeah, she said. I think you're right. As the photographer prepared his equipment and the family gathered for pictures, the ballroom buzzed with conversations that had nothing to do with wedding planning. Instead, guests were discussing cancer research, biotech innovation, and the mystery CEO who had been hiding in plain sight among the administrative support staff. The crystal chandelier cast the same elegant light, but everything else had changed. Sarah's engagement party had become the night the family discovered that success comes in many forms, and sometimes the person you overlook is actually the one changing the world. In the photos taken that night, Sarah still looked radiant in her designer gown, still the beautiful bride-to-be celebrating her engagement to high society. But standing beside her in a simple navy dress from Target was her sister. The cancer researcher, the CEO, the woman gracing the cover of Time magazine, the family member who had quietly revolutionized medicine while everyone else was making assumptions about filing and data entry. The pictures would capture a moment of transformation, when a family's understanding of achievement was permanently altered by 3 words on a magazine cover, and when the woman they'd labeled as Justice Secretary revealed herself to be one of the most important scientists of her generation. Sarah's perfect evening had become something even better. The night her family learned that greatness doesn't always announce itself, and sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who seem most ordinary. As the party continued around us, phones buzzing with news alerts and social media notifications, I caught Sarah's eye across the photographer's camera. She was still processing, still adjusting to a reality where her little sister's achievements dwarfed everyone else's in the room. But for the first time in our lives she looked at me with something new, not condescension or pity but respect. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of awe. The Time magazine cover story would run for a week, but the story of Sarah's engagement party would last much longer. The night a family discovered that their assumptions about success, achievement and potential needed complete revision, and when the woman they'd dismissed as ordinary revealed herself to be extraordinary. The thing about family dinners at my parents' house is that they follow a script. Dad sits at the head of the table in the chair he's occupied for 30 years. Mom brings out the roast or the chicken or whatever she spent all afternoon preparing. My older brother Kevin talks about his sales numbers. My younger sister Michelle shows photos of her kids. And I sit quietly eating my food, being the family disappointment. How's the apartment search going? Mom asked, passing the mashed potatoes. Still looking, I said. Which was true in a sense. I was always looking at real estate. Just not apartments for myself. Dad cut into his steak with more force than necessary. At 34 you should own something by now. Kevin bought his first house at 28. Kevin nodded from across the table. Market was better then, but still. You've got to build equity, Sarah. Renting is throwing money away. I'm aware, I said mildly. Are you? Dad set down his knife and fork, giving me his full attention. The attention that used to make me nervous when I was younger, desperate for his approval. Because from where I'm sitting, you've been working at that property management company for what, 8 years? And you've got nothing to show for it. 7 years, actually. 7, 8, what's the difference? Point is, you're spinning your wheels. Living in that tiny apartment, driving a 10-year-old Camry. Stop pretending to be successful when you're clearly not. Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother, raised his wine glass in agreement. Your father's right. At your age you should have assets. Property. Investments. You'll never own anything at the rate you're going. I kept eating my dinner, cutting my steak into precise pieces. You're probably right. Michelle jumped in, trying to help in her well-meaning way. Sarah works really hard, Dad. Property management is a real job. I didn't say it wasn't a real job. I said it's not getting her anywhere. Dad leaned back in his chair. You know what your problem is? You're too passive. Too willing to just accept whatever comes your way instead of fighting for more. Mom placed her hand on Dad's arm. Richard, maybe we could talk about something else. No, Barbara. She needs to hear this. All her life, Sarah's been content to just exist. No ambition. No drive. Look at Kevin, he's a regional sales director. Michelle married well, has a beautiful family. And Sarah's still in that cramped apartment complex doing admin work. The property management company where I worked was called Sterling Properties. I'd started there 7 years ago as an assistant property manager, learning the business from the ground up. Rent collection, maintenance requests, tenant relations, lease agreements. The unglamorous work of keeping buildings running and people housed. What Dad didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 years into that job I'd started buying properties myself. Small ones at first. A duplex that needed work. A 4-unit building in a transitioning neighborhood. I'd learned to spot potential, to run the numbers, to manage contractors and renovations and tenant relationships. What they really didn't know was that I'd bought Dad's house 5 years ago when he was facing foreclosure after a bad business investment. Bought it through an LLC, hired a management company to handle the ownership details, and let him think he'd worked out a special arrangement with the bank. The property taxes, the insurance, the major repairs. All of it flowed through my accounts while Dad thought he was making his mortgage payments to some faceless lending institution. I'm doing okay, I said quietly. Okay isn't good enough. Dad's voice rose. You're 34 years old. When I was your age, I owned this house, had 2 kids, and was building a business. What do you have? I looked at him across the table. At the house that was legally mine, that I'd saved when his construction business hit hard times. At the property tax bills I paid every November. The homeowner's insurance I renewed every spring, the new roof I'd approved last year when he thought the bank was covering it. Not much, I said. You're right about that. Kevin shook his head. Sarah, you've got to want more for yourself. That's all Dad's saying. Have some ambition. Kevin's mortgage is $2,800 a month, Dad said proudly. That's $33,600 a year in equity he's building. What are you paying in rent? $1,200? That's $14,400 a year you'll never see again. Actually, my rent was $950 for a perfectly nice 1-bedroom apartment that required 0 maintenance from me. And the 18 properties I owned across 3 counties generated about $47,000 a month in gross rental income, minus expenses. But who is counting? You make a good point, I said. Uncle Frank leaned forward. You need to get aggressive, Sarah. Real estate is wealth building. I've got 3 rental properties myself. Bought them over the years, built up equity. That's how you create financial security. 3 properties. I'd closed on my 19th 2 weeks ago. A 6-unit building near the university that would generate strong rental income from student housing. That's impressive, Uncle Frank, I said sincerely. Because it was impressive. 3 rental properties was more than most people ever accumulated. It's not rocket science, he continued. You just have to stop being afraid of debt. Leverage is your friend. Take out a loan, buy a property, rent it out. The tenants pay your mortgage. I'll think about it, I said. Dad sighed heavily. That's what you always say. I'll think about it. Meanwhile, time's passing. You're getting older. At some point, you've got to stop thinking and start doing. Mom cleared her throat. Who wants dessert? I made apple pie. The conversation shifted to safer topics. Kevin's latest sales trip, Michelle's youngest starting kindergarten, Uncle Frank's upcoming vacation. I helped Mom clear the dishes, accepted my slice of pie, and continued playing my role as the family underachiever. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my property manager at Sterling Properties, where I still worked full-time because I actually enjoyed the work. Tenant in Unit 4B says kitchen sink is leaking. Should I call the plumber? I texted back, yes, use Jerry. He's familiar with that building. Sarah, put the phone away at dinner, Dad said without looking at me. Sorry. I slipped it back in my pocket. After dessert, I helped Mom load the dishwasher while the men watched a football game in the living room. Don't take it personally, Mom said quietly. Your father just wants the best for you. I know. He worries. We both do. You're so quiet about your life, we never know what's really going on with you. I handed her another plate. I'm fine, Mom. Really? Are you dating anyone? Not at the moment. You should try those dating apps. Michelle met several nice men before she met Tom. I'll consider it. She patted my arm. You're a good girl, Sarah. I just wish you'd fight for yourself a little more. Let people see what you're capable of. If only she knew. Monday morning, I was at my desk at Sterling Properties when my phone rang. Dad's accountant, Gerald Morrison. Ms. Chin? This is Gerald Morrison. I handle your father's accounts. I know who you are, Gerald. What can I do for you? I'm reviewing your father's tax documents for the year, and I've noticed something unusual. The property tax payments on the house, they're not coming from his bank account. My stomach tightened. Okay. They're coming from an LLC. Meridian Property Holdings. I've been trying to track down the payment source because the records your father has don't match what I'm seeing from the county assessor's office. I see. Miss Chin, do you know anything about this? Your father seems to think he's been making these payments through his mortgage servicer, but that's not what the records show. They show direct payments from Meridian Property Holdings, which according to state business records, is registered to you. I closed my office door. Yes. That's my company. Your company has been paying your father's property taxes? For the last 5 years, yes. Silence on the other end. Then, Miss Chin, forgive me for being direct, but why? Because 5 years ago Dad was facing foreclosure. His business had taken some hits, he'd missed several payments, and the bank was starting proceedings. He didn't tell anyone because he was embarrassed. I found out through a friend who works in county records. And you? I bought the house. Paid off the mortgage, transferred the deed to my LLC. I hired a management company to handle the owner communications so Dad would think he was dealing with a bank or servicer. He makes his payments to the management account, which covers about 60% of the actual costs. I cover the rest: property taxes, insurance, major repairs. More silence. Does he know? No. Miss Chin, I have to disclose this to my client. This is his tax return we're discussing, and there are significant implications if he doesn't own the property he thinks he owns. I understand. Do what you need to do. For what it's worth, Gerald said, his voice softer, that was an extraordinarily generous thing you did. He's my father. He needed help. Still, most children couldn't, do something like that. After we hung up, I stared at my computer screen without really seeing it. 5 years of careful management, of quiet help, of letting Dad maintain his dignity while I kept the house he loved from being sold at auction. All about to be revealed because of tax season. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad, need to talk. Come by the house tonight. I drove to the house that evening. The house I legally owned, though it hadn't felt like mine in any real sense. Dad answered the door with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly. Something more complicated. Living room, he said. Mom was already there, sitting on the couch with a tissue in her hand. Uncle Frank was there too, standing by the fireplace. Kevin and Michelle hadn't been summoned to this particular family meeting. Gerald called me today, Dad said without preamble. Told me something very interesting about the property taxes on this house. I sat down in the chair across from the couch. Okay. He says you've been paying them. That you've been paying them because you own this house. My house. Technically, yes. Technically. Dad's voice rose. What the hell does that mean technically? It means legally the house is owned by my LLC. Meridian Property Holdings. You've been making payments to a management account that I set up. Those payments cover about 60% of the actual costs. I cover the difference. Mom pressed the tissue to her mouth. Uncle Frank stared at me like I'd announced I was an alien. 5 years, Dad said. Gerald says this has been going on for 5 years. Yes. Why? Because you were facing foreclosure. Because the bank was going to take the house you and Mom have lived in for 30 years. Because you needed help and were too proud to ask for it. Dad sat down heavily. I was working it out with the bank. I had a plan. You were 3 months from foreclosure proceedings. I checked. There was no plan that was going to save the house in time. So you just bought it? Without telling me? Yes. With what money? Uncle Frank interjected. Sarah, where did you get the money to buy a house? This house was worth $380,000 5 years ago. I looked at him steadily. I had it. From where? From the real estate portfolio I've been building for 9 years. I started with a duplex I bought with money I'd saved from working double shifts at Sterling. Fixed it up, rented it out, used the income and equity to buy another property. Then another. I've got 19 properties now across 3 counties. The portfolio is worth about $8.4 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. 8. Mom couldn't finish the sentence. Million. Give or take depending on current market valuations. The properties generate about $47,000 a month in gross rental income. After expenses, mortgages, taxes, insurance, maintenance, property management fees, I clear about $22,000 a month in profit. Dad's face had gone pale. You're a millionaire. Several times over, yes. But you work at a property management company. You drive a 10-year-old Camry. You live in a $950 apartment that requires zero maintenance from me and lets me focus my capital on income-generating properties instead of personal real estate. I kept my voice calm. I work at Sterling because I enjoy it and because it keeps me connected to the industry. The Camry runs perfectly well. I don't need a fancy car to prove anything. Uncle Frank sat down on the arm of the couch. 19 properties. 19. Most are small multifamily buildings. 4 to 8 units. One is a 12-unit apartment complex I bought at auction 3 years ago and renovated. That one alone generates $14,000 a month. Jesus Christ, Dad whispered. Mom was crying now, actually crying. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? I tried to. Multiple times over the years. But every time I mention real estate investing or property ownership, someone would change the subject or suggest I was getting ahead of myself. Eventually I stopped trying. But at dinner just last night, Dad stopped, his face flushing. I told you that you'd never own anything. You did. And you just sat there. You let me lecture you about building equity and wealth creation when you're... He couldn't finish. When I've been quietly doing exactly what you said people should do. Yes. Uncle Frank shook his head slowly. 3 properties. I've been proud of owning 3 rental properties. And you're sitting there with 19. Your 3 properties are impressive, Uncle Frank. You built them over time carefully, which is the right way to do it. I just had more time and got lucky with some of the purchases. Don't do that, Dad said sharply. Don't downplay what you've done. $8 million isn't luck. No, I agreed. It's 9 years of 18-hour days. It's learning to read market trends and spot undervalued properties. It's developing relationships with contractors and learning to manage renovations under budget. It's tenant management and legal compliance and financial modeling and risk assessment. It's a lot of things, but luck is only a small part of it. Mom wiped her eyes. The house. You saved the house. I saved your house. Dad's house. The house where I grew up. Yes. Why? Dad's voice cracked. Why would you do that without telling me? Because you needed help and wouldn't have accepted it if you'd known it was coming from me. Because you were ashamed of the business problems and didn't want anyone to know. Because I had the ability to help and it seemed like the right thing to do. But you let me think. He stopped, swallowed hard. I've been making those payments every month. Thinking I was paying a mortgage, maintaining my house, being responsible. And it wasn't all fake, Dad. You were being responsible. Those payments you make cover most of the operating costs. The property taxes and insurance I handle separately, yes, but you're not living here for free. You're contributing significantly to the household expenses. 60%, Gerald said. About that, yes. The taxes alone are $8,200 a year. Insurance is another $2,400. Your payments don't quite cover everything, but they cover a lot. Uncle Frank stood up suddenly. I need a drink. Richard, you want a drink? Yeah, Dad said. Yeah, I do. They went to the kitchen, leaving me alone with Mom. Sarah, she said softly. When you said you were looking at apartments, what did you actually mean? I was looking at a 12-unit building in Riverside. Needs some work, but the location is good and I think I can get it for under market value. I made an offer last week. So you're not looking for a place to live? No. I'm happy where I am. Low overhead means more capital for investment. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. Your father told you that you'd never own anything. And you own our house. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize for being generous and discreet and everything we raised you to be. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd seen it. I tried to tell you, Mom. Remember 2 years ago at Thanksgiving? I mentioned I was thinking about expanding into commercial properties. You said that sounded nice and asked if I'd tried online dating. She covered her face with her hands. Oh God. I remember that. I thought you meant you were thinking about maybe buying a small rental house someday. I meant I was considering purchasing a 6,000 square foot commercial building to convert into office spaces. Did you buy it? Yes. It's fully leased now. 3 businesses, generating $8,500 a month. Dad and Uncle Frank returned with whiskey glasses. Dad handed one to Mom, who took it without protest. I don't understand, Dad said, sitting down across from me again. How did we not see this? How did we miss that you were building an empire while we thought you were struggling? Because I didn't need you to see it. I just needed to build it. But why? Why let us think you were? He gestured helplessly. Unsuccessful. Directionless. A disappointment. I met his eyes. Because correcting you every time you made assumptions was exhausting. Because I got tired of trying to make you understand. Because at some point, I realized my success didn't require your validation. The words hung in the air between us. Uncle Frank broke the silence. That's fair. Brutal but fair. I'm not trying to be brutal. I'm trying to be honest. You asked why I didn't tell you. I'm telling you. I tried. You didn't hear me. Eventually I stopped trying. Mom set down her whiskey glass with a sharp click. And the house. When were you planning to tell us about the house? Honestly, I wasn't. I was going to keep paying the taxes and insurance and let you live here as long as you wanted. When you eventually passed away, I'd have quietly transferred it to Kevin or Michelle. Nobody needed to know. That's insane, Kevin's voice came from the doorway. Michelle stood behind him. Apparently word had spread and they'd come over. Is it? I turned to look at them. What would have been better? Telling Dad I'd bought his house out from under him? Making him feel like he'd failed so completely that his daughter had to rescue him? That seemed crueler than just handling it quietly. She's got a point, Michelle said softly. Kevin came into the room followed by Michelle. Sarah, this is crazy. You're a property manager. How do you own 19 buildings? 20. I closed on number 20 last week. 6-unit building near the university. 20 properties. Jesus. Kevin sat down on the floor, apparently unable to process this information, standing up. And you work at Sterling, why? Because I like it. Because property management was how I learned the business. Because keeping that job means I stay grounded in the actual work of maintaining properties rather than just collecting rent checks from a distance. Dad was staring into his whiskey glass. 5 years. You've been saving my house for 5 years and letting me lecture you about building equity and financial responsibility. You weren't wrong about the principles, Dad. Building equity is important. Owning property creates wealth. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything, he said bitterly. You figured it out on your own while I was too busy being disappointed in you to see what you'd actually accomplished. That's not entirely true. You taught me to spot good value. Remember taking me to estate sales when I was a kid? You'd evaluate properties, point out what needed fixing, what had potential. I learned that from you. Estate sales, he repeated. You learned real estate investing from me taking you to garage sales. I learned to see potential. To understand that something's current condition doesn't define its future value. That's the foundation of everything I've built. Michelle was crying now too. Apparently it was a family trait. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I thought you were just, I don't know, content with not having much. And the whole time you've been running a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. Yeah. I looked around at my family, at all these people who'd known me my whole life without really seeing me. Look, I know this is a lot to process. And I know you all feel bad about the assumptions you made. But I don't need apologies. I need you to understand that I'm okay. I've always been okay. I didn't need saving or fixing or lectures about ambition. I just needed to be left alone to build what I was building. But we could have helped, Mom said. If we'd known. You couldn't have helped. Not really. This wasn't about money or connections. It was about learning a business from the ground up, making mistakes, figuring things out. The help I needed was the kind I had to find myself. Uncle Frank raised his glass. To Sarah, who apparently has more balls than all of us combined. Frank, Mom said reprovingly, but she was smiling slightly. What? It's true. She bought her father's house without telling him to save his pride. That takes guts. Dad finally looked up from his whiskey. What happens now? What do you mean? With the house. It's yours. Legally yours. What are you planning to do with it? Nothing. You live here, you keep making your payments, everything continues exactly as it has been. The only thing that changes is now you know the truth. But you own it. On paper, yes. But it's your home. That doesn't change. Sarah, we can't just live in your house without. Why not? You're already doing it. You have been for 5 years. Nothing has to change unless you want it to. Mom shook her head. Everything's changed. We thought we knew you and we didn't know you at all. You knew me. You just didn't know what I did for a living. There's a difference. Is there? Dad set down his glass. Because I'm sitting here realizing that I told my millionaire daughter that she'd never amount to anything. I lectured her about ambition while she was quietly saving my house. I don't know how to. His voice broke. I don't know how to come back from that. You don't need to come back from anything, Dad. You were wrong about my circumstances, but you weren't wrong about the principles. Property ownership is important. Building equity matters. Financial security is worth pursuing. You taught me that. I just applied it differently than you expected. I called you passive, he said. Last night at dinner I said you were too passive, too willing to accept whatever came your way. I remember. And the whole time you've been one of the most aggressive real estate investors I've never heard of. I smiled slightly. I prefer strategic to aggressive, but yeah, essentially. Kevin was scrolling through his phone. I just Googled Meridian Property Holdings. There's a business listing. It says, Commercial and Residential Property Management and Investment. That's your company. That's one of my companies. I have 3 LLCs for different purposes. Keeps the liability separate. 3 companies, he repeated. You have 3 companies. And she still drives a Camry, Uncle Frank said, shaking his head. Unbelievable. The Camry runs great. Why would I replace it? Because you can afford to. Dad said, gesturing wildly. Sarah, you're worth $8 million. You could drive a Mercedes. You could live in a mansion. You could. I could, I agreed. But I don't want to. I like my life the way it is. Simple. Efficient. Focused on work I find meaningful rather than consumption I don't need. Michelle spoke up from the doorway. What do you need? What? You said consumption you don't need. What do you actually need? What makes you happy? I thought about it. Seeing a property I've renovated come back to life. Helping tenants find affordable, well-maintained housing. Solving the puzzle of how to make a building profitable while keeping rents reasonable. That makes me happy. Not things, Michelle said. Work makes you happy. Good work makes me happy. Work that matters makes me happy. Dad stood up suddenly. I need to apologize. Properly. Not just for last night, but for every time I suggested you weren't doing enough, weren't being enough, weren't enough. Sarah, I'm sorry. Dad. No, let me finish. I'm your father. I should have seen you. I should have asked questions and actually listened to the answers. I should have trusted that you knew what you were doing even when it didn't look like what I expected success to look like. He crossed the room and pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm so damn proud of you. I hugged him back, this complicated man who'd driven me crazy and motivated me in equal measure. Thanks, Dad. The house, he said, pulling back. We should talk about the house. About making this arrangement more official, more fair to you. It's already fair. You're contributing what you can. I'm covering the rest. It works. But your money is being used the way I want to use it. Dad, do you know what financial security means to me? It means knowing that the people I love have stable housing. That you and Mom can stay in the house where you raised us. That's worth more than any Mercedes or mansion. Mom was crying again but smiling through the tears. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between property 3 and property 4. Right around the time I realized that wealth isn't about what you own, it's about what you can do for the people and causes you care about. The next Sunday dinner was different. Dad didn't lecture me about ambition. Kevin asked actual questions about property management and real estate investing. Michelle wanted to know about the renovation process. Uncle Frank asked for advice about his 3 rental properties. Mom still made pot roast. We still sat around the same table. But the conversation had changed, opened up, become more honest. I looked at that building in Riverside, I said over dinner. The 12-unit. Going to pass on it. Foundation issues that would cost more to fix than the property's worth. Smart, Dad said. Always check the foundation. You taught me that. He smiled. Maybe I taught you more than I thought. You taught me plenty. You just didn't realize I was paying attention. After dinner, Dad and I did the dishes while everyone else watched football in the living room. He washed, I dried, the same division of labor we'd had since I was a kid. The property taxes are due next month, he said casually. For the house. I know. I've got it covered. Sarah, I'd like to pay them myself this year. The full amount. I looked at him. Dad, it's $8,200. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, but I want to. You've been covering them for 5 years. Let me do it this year. Okay, I said softly. If that's what you want. What I want is to contribute properly to the house I live in. What I want is to stop letting my daughter carry financial burdens I should be carrying. What I want is to be a better father than I've been. You've been a fine father. I've been a blind father. But I'm working on seeing better. He handed me another plate. Tell me about property 21. What are you looking at next? So I told him about the 8-unit building I was considering in East Side, about the market analysis I'd done, about the potential for renovation and improved rental income. He asked good questions, offered insights from his construction days, made suggestions about contractors who might do good work. We talked real estate and business and building wealth, father and daughter finally on the same page. Mom found us there an hour later, still at the sink, still talking, making up for years of conversations we should have had. You two going to stand there all night? Maybe, Dad said grinning. Your daughter's teaching me about capitalization rates. God help us all, Mom said, but she was smiling. I drove home that night to my $950 apartment in my 10-year-old Camry, past several properties I owned, past the life I'd built while everyone thought I was barely scraping by. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Thank you. For everything. But especially for the house. Love you. I texted back. Love you too. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to work without pressure, to build without scrutiny, to become who you're meant to be without everyone watching and judging every move. But being seen, finally being seen for what you've actually accomplished, that has its own value. I parked in my assigned spot, climbed the stairs to my simple apartment, and pulled up the listing for property 21. 8 units, good bones, strong potential. I'd make an offer in the morning. As this was what I did. What I'd always done. What I'd keep doing regardless of whether anyone was watching or not. Building. Growing. Creating something that mattered. One property at a time.